Good evening and welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. We are here this evening looking at the book Simply Jesus by N.T. Wright. Darlene, could you hold up the book for us so that we can all see? If you'd like to follow along with us, you can click the link in the description and you'll be able to try and access the book. Join us. We'd love to be able to hear your thoughts or even just to listen to the conversation that we're about to have. We are today looking at chapters 8 and 9. Am I correct, people? Yeah, chapters 8 and 9, just double checking. I didn't come on here and I read something else. Chapters 8 and 9. And so we're going to see what we can reap from this. I'm joined here by with Dee and Matt and James and myself. And we're looking forward to see what we can get from this. So let's kick off, shall we? Chapter 8. Stories that explain a message that transforms. I found this an incredibly interesting chapter. Many times we talk or we narrate the stories that Jesus tells. I think the purpose of what N.T. Wright was trying to accomplish in this chapter was to tell us why Jesus told stories and why didn't he use a different form in order to try and speak the truth? Why did he use stories in particular? One thing that was quite interesting for me is it's normal for us to know that he told them to inspire people. I get that. Yeah, that makes sense. But here's a thought that I definitely mulled over. Jesus was intentional about telling stories, not only to uplift and inspire, but also to confound and to confuse some. Like he was almost strategic in how to be able to tell information without telling information. And that's not something that we necessarily ascribe to Jesus. I understand why he would do that, because I guess one of the main reasons why he would do that is because some people were simply not ready to hear the truth that he had to be able to declare and speak of. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts, but I felt that was really interesting. I'll give you one quote and then open up the floor for us to talk about. It's literally on the first page on 87. They were stories designed to tease, to clothe the shocking and revolutionary message of God's kingdom in garb that left the hearers wondering, trying to think it out, never quite able, in brackets, until near the end, to pin down Jesus. Here is a God who, contrary to popular belief, doesn't always want to be pinned down. I'll leave it at that. What did you guys think of chapter 8? Who's going first? Anything that jumped out for you?
I liked kind of his summary. I thought it was, he dropped this word subversive again and again throughout the chapter, which I thought was, I don't know that I've ever quite thought about it that way. I mean, but seems to fit with kind of how you hear how at least his relationship with the Pharisees and the leaders when it came to a lot of these parables was that, in some cases, I don't know if it always says, but in some cases you get the feeling that maybe the other, the leaders of the day were in on it or they were not, right? There's nothing immediately is coming to mind where, maybe he's needling them and saying, yeah, you know the true answer to this. And I think, yeah, there is some evidence to back that up.
One example comes to mind when it wasn't necessarily a story, but he uses an analogy of some sort. You remember when they come to Jesus about the donkey in the well, or they present the idea of, oh, should we save the donkey or should we leave the donkey in the well? And Jesus, well, sorry, it's Jesus who actually presents that to them. Should we save the donkey or leave the donkey in the well? And Jesus asks the question, knowing full well that they know what the answer should be.
Yeah. And you get that feeling, right? And so it's kind of just very high level. They're trying to spar with him intellectually, and he kind of disarms them a lot of the times. But at the same time, I think some of this stuff probably did fly over their head, but
yeah,
he never really always quite outright incriminated himself, which is the other thing.
I'll tell you what, I resonate fully with N.T. Wright only because we're both ministers. In terms of the example where he gives, where someone tries to pigeonhole him or corner him to try and give a response about something. There are a number of times that I introduce myself to strangers in the community wherever I go, and people find out, yes, I'm a minister. and immediately they fire in, what's your view on abortion? And, and it's like, you know, there isn't a genuine inquiry. There's something deeper, more at bay. And usually I don't just give an answer to let them know about, I want to know why they asked the question. I want to know what's behind what you're thinking. And I think Jesus knew that to some degree. There was something behind why people ask certain questions. Definitely, I resonate with that 100%. Anything else? James, did you catch anything from chapter 8?
Yeah, that quote that you quoted on page 87 also, I wrote that quote too, designed to tease, to clothe the shocking and revolutionary message of his kingdom. Right in that same paragraph, N.T. Wright says how his stories were full of echoes. I love that, how he describes that, full of echoes. I think, yes, his stories were intentionally selected. You know, they were great, sometimes allusions and references to nature, the sower and the seed, etc. But they were very intentional. They were packed full of meaning, and I get the sense that it would be something akin to our modern sort of familiarity with certain events in American history, where if I said things like, JFK or the Challenger or 9/11, just these short phrases are just packed with emotion and just things that people are all familiar with. And I think these stories and these allusions to like the sower and the seed had something akin to that effect. They had echoes of the past that everyone was familiar with. And so it would be easy for the Israelites hearing his stories to
latch onto it.
Yes, especially if their hearts were open to it, not sold into a different idea of what they would think the kingdom and the Messiah would be. But yeah, I love that word, that his stories are full of echoes, and that really kind of made this alive for me. Yeah.
I experienced something like that actually today when someone asked me today actually. So Sam, how was your Memorial weekend? Did you spend some time thinking about anyone who, might be special to you, who you've lost or anything like that? And I just turned up and I was like, I guess I just kind of found out it was Memorial weekend on the week because I'm not an American. And it didn't resonate with me because to every American, like you guys, you all know what you've been, remembering Memorial Weekend all your lives probably. But for me, it was just like, it was just the weekend. And I went paddleboarding. But there are these checkpoints that Jesus is very, very well aware of the Jewish customs and traditions and backstory and narrative, just like in the previous chapters when he talks about them coming from the Exodus. Jesus knows what he's like. He's like he pokes the bear sometimes, and sometimes he just lays off. And yeah, I think N.T. Wright just honed in the drone a little bit more for us to try our best to understand how intentional Jesus' story was, where they weren't just random things that he picked out of thin air, but they were tools in order to try and serve as vehicles for the gospel to get across to people, or to challenge people to think differently. Dee, did you have any thoughts on chapter 8? Anything?
I think the one thing that stood out to me was, I knew that when Christ, came as the Messiah, that he came not only to Israel, but to all. But I guess reading the chapter, it almost made me think that him coming was in a way bringing judgment upon the people of the Jewish nation, and in that way, using the parables, like he didn't say it directly, but the listeners who were really listening, like the Pharisees and the high priest, they knew exactly that. I think they knew that the judgment was upon them.
You think so?
Or at least like somebody knew that what they were doing, what they were standing for was not truth, not real. You know what I mean?
I guess I got the impression that they were always oblivious to it, but now, yeah, I can see that they probably had a hunch. They knew the scriptures, they knew what was going on, and they had a hunch, and they lived quite guilty because of exile. So I guess there's definitely some truth to that. 100%.
That's what I thought. I was just in reading it.
I understand. There was a forward motion in chapter 8 as Jesus tells his parables, as N.T. Wright tries to give us some conclusions as to the why, or at least how he frames things in terms of when he concludes with the parables. So many instances the Jews and we as Christians in today's day and age tend to see Jesus as a ruler, to come in, to take charge, and to overthrow other rulers. We'll come to a little bit of that in a bit. There's a quote on page 98 which I thought was very interesting, and it talks about the conclusions of some of those parables. Top of page 98, it says this, and he's concluding about the idea that he is a God who has come to be in charge. And this is what N.T. Wright says. It isn't that God coming to rule on earth is picky or grouchy, determined to find fault. It is rather that the patient is deathly sick and the doctor must prescribe an appropriately drastic course of treatment. It is that the sheep are in danger of being totally lost since they appear to have no shepherd at all. Jesus speaks of himself more than once as a doctor, also more than once as a shepherd. I thought that was quite a simple way to just bring across the agenda that God has. The Jews were looking for an oppressive overturner. They were looking for someone to completely obliterate the opposition. And Jesus, the conclusions of Jesus's parables had nothing to do with the world takeover like we want him to do, but it had more to do with a heart takeover that takes place in an individual. I hope I'm making sense.
Totally. That's what I thought. Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, one of the things that really I found really cool was he pointed out that in some cases what Jesus didn't say was more powerful than what he said. And then I think that goes in general for a lot of us when we're interacting and conversing with others. I guess one example of that, of what he didn't say, was a lot of us, myself included, grew up thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get to heaven? But I didn't realize, when we look at Jesus's sayings and writings, his teachings, his stories, he doesn't really say details about, or like a roadmap of how to get to heaven. I mean, there are some more soul-oriented generalizations, like, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself, the Beatitudes, but not the concrete map that one might want. And it's very interesting that he doesn't say that. So, kind of tying into this heart message that we are suggesting here, that Jesus talks about.
But that's the point, isn't it?
Yes, right.
He gives no details of how to get to heaven, but every detail of how to transform your heart. And that's not what I want. Because I would rather he just give me the ABCs. In some ways, this is why I understand religions like Islam. I get why it's an incredibly attractive religious focus, because Islam will tell you do A, B, C, and D, and then you will accomplish this result. If you pray 5 times a day, if you do this, and if you do that, then this is what you deserve this is what you will get. Christianity is more complicated like that, and it's just not like that. The ABCs that are given are not to get to a destination, but it's to get to a transformation, which is very uncomfortable. You wanted to say something, Matt? It's on the tip of your tongue.
Debating. Not to be too pessimistic, but theoretically Christianity shouldn't be that way, right? But I think we want it to be that way, right?
Sorry, clarify. We want it to be what way?
We want it to be an ABC.
Oh, right.
Get to heaven, right? We want to be, okay, we become perfect, and then that's what's going to trigger the second coming.
Yeah,
right?
we do.
But man made it that way, right?
Right.
Man made
And
it that way.
yeah. And I think, you know, I really liked page 98 where you kind of called that out. He kind of addresses that from the Jewish Pharisee perspective. At the bottom of 98, he goes into that really it wouldn't simply do to tighten up the existing laws and regulations and enforce them more tightly. That's not what Jesus wanted to do. That's what the Pharisees wanted to do. They were a popular pressure group urging moral reform as part of their own vision of how God might become king. I think we, you know, maybe Christianity hasn't always tried to frame its theology around, you know, do A, B, and C, and that's what you need to succeed. But boy, with prosperity gospel and perfectionism, and, you know, wherever you want on that spectrum, Christianity really makes a push to try to come up with that easy answer of you do this and God is going to deliver this, which it's kind of a human condition, right? I mean, even going back to the Garden of Eden, just take that apple and that will get you your knowledge. This will give you that. So
yeah, I want the easy route. I can't remember what movie it was I was watching. It was some kind of movie with a dystopian kind of future of Earth was ending and I guess coming to pieces or whatever it was. And as many of these movies go, they had managed to secure space on Mars or something, or whatever it is, the moon. And there was this selection policy where they only took a few individuals from Earth, the qualifying people, and everyone else would be destroyed. And they had made this kind of machine that you get inside, and it scans your body, and any disease that you have, because of the technological advancement, it fixed you basically. It repatched things. If you had cancer, it took away the cancer and repatched your body together. If you were missing an organ, it would rehash an organ for you. And only people with perfect bodies could make it into this new life. Anyway, I tell this story of that movie because I remember watching it thinking, man, what would I give just to be in that machine, to fix every single ailment and problem that I have, for me to be perfect, for this asthma to go away, just to at a click of a finger. Like, that's the kind of Christianity I desire. I'm not going to lie. The kind of Christianity which involves me keeping a somewhat flawed body, but having a renewed heart takes work. Takes work that it's not about a God who comes and clicks his fingers and say, you're fixed. It's about a God who comes in, walks by your side and say, let's do this together. And that's not a very attractive gospel that Jesus came in to try. And I think that's one of the things that serves as a major misconception to those who don't or resist against Christianity, because they are resisting against that kind of slow love walk with God. They want a God who can just, and that's just not the God that is presented in the Bible. At least those are some of my thoughts anyway. Shall we move on quickly to chapter 9?
I'm not done with chapter 8, are we?
Oh, you're not done? You have some more to say?
Ah,
You want to mention a few more things? Go on, Dave.
no, I wanted to talk a little bit about on page 100, what goes in and what comes out
Okay,
about our heart condition.
sure.
I want to talk about, I don't know if I should bring this up.
Well, you've already half
There's a lot
brought
of
it
that
up.
tonight, isn't there?
You've already half brought it up, so you now have to follow through. You've already loosened the jar, so go on, follow through.
I already know where I stand as a Seventh-day Adventist, okay?
Okay.
With this whole unclean and clean and it relating to food issue, okay? I know
Okay.
where I stand, okay? But just made me think again about just our overall, our SDA belief
Mm-hmm.
and what we practice. And I
Okay.
think we have really come a long way in practicing and teaching. I think I could be wrong, practicing and teaching and practicing that food is not a salvation issue. I mean, what you eat or do not eat is not dependent on your salvation. Your salvation is not
Sure.
dependent on,
Sure.
right? I mean, I think that, I'm correct, right?
Yes,
As a
of course,
Seventh-day
of
Adventist, right? But there's still a lot of I think guilt and shame when it comes to food issue.
Mhm.
And depending on who you are, some people are perfectly fine with eating everything and and all of that. But there are also people who do it secretly or feel shamed about it, guilt about it, whatever goes on. And and I know where I stand, but I'm not quite sure. I've always had lived under the impression that I need to keep quiet, that I can't share what I know, what I practice or whatever, because you don't want to lead people astray. You don't want to, what's the word that we use? You don't want to be a stumbling
A
block
stumbling block, yeah.
to others. So I believe in a health message, but yeah, I'm just
Okay,
thoughts that I just
so N.T. Wright does open up the can of worms, so to speak, on our page 100, where he talks about where people challenge Jesus and his disciples about what they should eat and what they shouldn't eat. I think the crux of the concern that N.T. Wright homes in on is, how does Jesus himself get communicated as one who is a leader? And I think one thing's clear to say, if I was to go down to page 100, just to finish off the question on food, N.T. Wright says, as the story continues, though Jesus goes to the deep root of the problem, it isn't what goes into you that defiles you. He declares it's what comes out of you that defiles you. And he ends up going a little bit deeper into that. I think at the end of the day, it's important for us to know where we as a church stand on this matter, but it's also important for us to know where we stand. I'm not saying that we should disagree and separate those two worlds. I'm identifying it as fact. They are two different distinctions sometimes that do exist, what I believe and what the church believes, and we should openly call it out, recognize those differences, and see then what we should do about trying to merge or reject or accept those two different worlds. I think it's something that's an individual journey, and I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of, once we recognize it's not a salvation issue, we then got to ask ourselves the question, why is it we feel guilty?
I don't feel guilty.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you do.
Feel guilty.
I'm not saying that you do. I'm not saying that you do. I'm just saying you brought it up in general that there are some people who feel guilty.
Yeah, I know plenty of people.
Right, and I think we need to deconstruct that. It's because the issue here is not food. It's not.
But a lot of people. But even this issue is not food. But even when we take it as a food issue, right?
Right.
That's what I'm taking it as a food issue. And I'm looking at it from that perspective of how we, understand it, how we practice it, and yeah.
I think that Jesus teaches us something very powerful in these few lines of him working out what is in you and what comes out of you. I think that right now, I'm an aspiring vegetarian. I guess I have my moments, but I know that there is so much about me that needs to get sorted out, that sometimes I don't put as much effort upon my diet than I need to because I've got bigger fish to fry. And that's me being honest and saying that, you know, I have way more things that make me feel guilty than I'm working on. And I recommend that. I recommend that only because guilt is, to me, is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Guilt to me is a highlight that there is something
you
morally
need to-
working on in my
Mhm.
head that I need to
Yes.
speak to.
Mm.
That's what I would say about that issue. I think there's a few more things that we say. I don't know if James or Matt wants to add to that. Do you?
Go ahead. Yeah, you go.
I was gonna say, I was just different. I was reading a different book this last week, and it was interesting. It was going just a little bit into noting that in Revelation,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of John who kind of is almost needling back onto, you know, Paul was very different than Peter in how they viewed, you know, eating food that was sacrificed to idols, right? And, you know, Peter was, you can't do that. We have these Jewish rules. Paul was like, it's all free, it's all good. But you even go into Revelation and some of John's, I can't quote it now, but some of John's discussions to some of the churches at that time, last remaining apostle, he had to kind of turn back some of that Pauline message of saying, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be eating this. So like, this isn't something that even the disciples who were right there with Jesus as he was, you know, talking about this still kind of were in the weeds a bit. So maybe not something to feel too bad, I guess, about if they were still back and forth. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is one of those cases where, you know, what Jesus didn't say almost speaks more volumes, but, you know, he never said, go ahead and eat pork, or go ahead and sell whatever you want on Sabbath. But he did. I'm glad, Matt, you know, you pointed out sort of the perfectionist, the what was the other trend sometimes, the prosperity gospel, yes, these days, because it's so contrast with the actual what Jesus was actually saying. I mean, a lot of times he was pointing out the uncleanness of the heart, you know, saying, oh, woe to you, and oh boy, they're going to be gnashing of teeth, and you know, where were you? I didn't know you, you know, this kind of language. And it sounds harsh at times, but I think when we look at it in the context of, you know, when Pastor Sam was talking about pointing out how the reality is we are deathly sick. We are deathly sick. And that's was one of Jesus' biggest mission, to be the great physician, to restore us, to heal us, to forgive us, to I mean, not only physically, I mean, he did a lot of that, physically healing and curing and miraculous works, but really the heart. The kingdom was to start from the heart. And so when I look at like the food issue, I mean, obviously, just think of any toxin, anything that you know is bad for you. You keep eating it and you're going to die. There's a lot of emperors in China and even Korea who used to think mercury was like a longevity medication. A little did they know they were just killing themselves. So yeah, obviously, you eat something bad, it's going to hurt you. That's just natural law. But again, I think what supersedes that, and what Jesus's point was, hey, if you're keeping all these little nitty-gritty laws without having the spirit of it, you know, without having the heart of it. In fact, this past Saturday, I was teaching the juniors Desire of Ages chapter on the Sabbath. And there was a quote by Ellen White that really struck out. She said, if you're keeping all these sacrifices and, you know, all these little laws of the Sabbath without the heart, it's basically mockery. She says that, mockery. And so I think it was really in line with what Jesus taught too. He was really trying to get to the point to help them realize that the real uncleanness lies in your heart. It's what comes out of you. It's not, what goes into you, so to speak.
I get that. Okay, I'm sure we can talk more about this, but let's try and hot step to chapter 9, just with the few minutes that we have left. So let me just very, very brief summary. N.T. Wright essentially gives us a history lesson through 4 key individuals. Is it 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah? Yeah. So four key individuals that lived before, during, and after Jesus's time. The first is Judah the Hammer. Not many people know about him. He's during the Maccabean revolt. This is essentially, if you want to situate it chronologically, if you know the books of the Bible, at the end of Malachi, the final book of the Old Testament, and between that time and the beginning of Matthew, that's the time of the Maccabees. Basically, all the time that the Bible is kind of silent on between Malachi and Matthew, that's the time of the Maccabees. It was a huge revolt that took place, a lot of kind of mini wars and civil unrest that took place, but essentially a revolution takes place against the Roman Empire that tries to overthrow, but it doesn't quite happen. And anyway, there's a bunch of things that take place, but this particular person, Judah the Hammer, is a very powerful person who basically goes out and tries to assert his authority over many different people. He eventually aids in the destruction of the temple and a bunch of other things. So that's the first individual. One thing that's particularly interesting about him that N.T. Wright wants to bring out is the idea that he so-called cleansed the temple. Now, I'll say this, and I think me and Darlene had this conversation just previously. The Adventist narrative, as they look at interpreting prophecy, won't mention Judah the Hammer because they don't see Judah the Hammer as part of this prophetic picture of the cleansing of the temple. However, other religions, other denominations will see him as part of the prophetic narrative, and he's very much linked to a very famous individual who's called Antiochus Epiphanes. Without going into all these details to bore everyone that's listening to us, this is, I leave it up to you to research and look into it. The point is this: there were these key influential leaders at the time who were trying to assert their authority and literally harness the hope that were on the Jews and break them to pieces and let them know that they weren't in fact in charge. And in fact, the king of the Jews were them per se. They were rulers of their lives and there was nothing that they could stop them. The second individual who also played a part in that kind of picture was Simon the Star. New to me, didn't really know much about him. The long and short of it, he was more seen as a religious figure as well as a political figure. One where he literally came in to take over a bunch of loads of Jews, usurp his authority, and crush them too. And then we get to Herod the Great, the famous Herod the Great. And one of the reasons why he stands out very different is because, one, he was mentioned in the Bible, and the other two weren't. But one stark difference is the other two emperors had small stints of power. Herod's power span over 30 plus years or something like that. And so he was really quite significant. He wanted to gain the title King of the Jews. He couldn't really get that title. It was offered to previous leaders before him, but he almost did kind of have that kind of nuance of King of the Jews. And then finally, we come to the final person, Simon Bargiora, from AD 66 to 70, another great revolutionist of the Roman Empire who wanted to try and usurp his authority, crush the temple, and destroy any hope that the Jews had. So probably not the best of summaries, but these are the four individuals that were presented. Here's my question as to you guys as you read through that and learned the history. What do you think was the significance of these individuals in light of the fact that Jesus was situated at this time? Did anything pop out to you personally as to why these individuals helped to validate Jesus's ministry on the earth? Or did anything pop out to you that highlighted why Jesus's ministry was significant in response to all four of these people? Does anyone have any comments they want to mention?
Okay, well, before maybe there might be a big point here that I think we'll save here, but it's actually interesting. In some ways, the ones who came before Jesus I imagine it could have possibly invalidated his recognition as Messiah, in the sense that all four of these were quoted by N.T. Wright as examples of, sort of this pattern in Jewish thought of having this leader come up in revolt and become the hero, and then victory, and then triumph, and new kingdom rushes in, but they all ended in failure, really, and sometimes horrifically, or death and punishment. And so there was a quote at the end of that fourth guy named Simon
Bargiora.
Yes, where it says, it takes little imagination to see Jesus of Nazareth nailed to a Roman cross with the words "King of the Jews." Many have claimed to be King of the Jews amongst these revolters. Over his head must have been seen by many in exactly the same way as Simon Bargiora, just another failed Messiah to be
because he tried to free the slaves and failed.
Yeah.
In that respect. Yeah.
But I think the bigger point of some of this was, as the title of this chapter suggests, is the kingdom present and future. The kingdom present and future. And I think for me, the example in the Bible that really captured all this was David, where we remember he was anointed by Samuel the prophet. And of course, for many years, Saul was still king, and he was just in hiding because Saul was trying out to kill him. But he was already anointed as king. But we know that inevitably, David's kingdom was going to be here. It's going to get established. It's going to start. It was just a matter of time, and for certain things to occur, right, step by step. And so that concept is difficult for the modern thought of present and future kingdom. They're both here and now. But I guess that might be a way to help understand that okay, here's Jesus, right? He's anointed as the Messiah, and perhaps not all aspects of his kingdom have been established or have become realized yet, but just as David was anointed, it's inevitable. It's done. It's set. It's we can have confidence and faith in that.
At one point, I think he mentions, if a new kingdom is established, and whether whoever is in charge, if people start to follow the new king, the kingdom has commenced. And that's very symbolic of how things were when Jesus came. Dee, any thoughts on chapter 9 that made it things significant for you?
So I guess, truly the Jewish nation thought that the kingdom of God, when Messiah came, that he would actually establish a physical kingdom. But obviously it was a kingdom of God in each individual's heart that was being established. And in that way, the kingdom of God is already here in each of our hearts for those who have accepted him. But I think, and I think that, there was a proclamation of his kingdom being established when, Christ came. And then I guess you could say the battle was won against the tyrant, I guess, being a Satan, when Christ died and was resurrected, right?
Right.
And I guess the final victory will come, I guess, in his second coming. That'll be the final victory, and the real kingdom, the physical kingdom being established as well. So I guess this question of, God's kingdom, is it being present and in the future? I think the answer is yes to both.
Yeah. Matt, any thoughts you want to add?
This was a kind of squirrel moment, I guess. I don't know why. One thing that kind of intrigued me was, like, in the middle of page 116, where he's talking about like how, any kind of a campaign that we saw in these four examples would have, a proclamation at the beginning, and then it's going to end with a final battle that's won and the temple's rebuilt. For some reason, the thing that kind of like occurred to me going, yeah, but wait, is like when Jesus died, you had the ripping of the divider between the most holy place, right? Like, and so in some sense, like the physical temple was broken, right? There's a certain element of that. Like, oh, that was just kind of an interesting. I don't know that it went any different than that, but I think it's this final part, this final battle that really that's the difference. I mean, they all kind of proclaimed themselves in some ways, and they gained followers, and I'm sure that Jesus's followers were thinking there was about to be we're on the verge of a revolution. But it's that final battle that kind of is like Jesus's way of just saying, yeah, but this time it's different, right? And that, I don't know, maybe I was gonna say, I don't know that I saw a lot of similarities between the four examples he gave, but that's maybe what I saw, is that there's an opposite, and it did stand out. When he died, you had a centurion who was there and saying,
right,
this man was the Son of God. Like, something stuck out, and it stuck out enough that we're not following any of these four examples. I guess we're still kind of celebrating Hanukkah, but
well, these four examples are examples of kinds of kingdoms that are still recognized today in our physical societies.
Yeah.
It's not to denounce the fact that we should have presidents or prime ministers or what have you. It is the system that we have set up. It's functional, it's dysfunctional. We can argue left, right, and center about it. I think N.T. Wright's leading up to this climax where he wants to try and help us realize that there is a kingdom that not many people identify as a legitimate realm for occupancy, which is our heart. Many of the times we establish, America is a place that needs to be ruled. England is a place that needs to be ruled. These are territory states, Washington, and all these. These are territories that are identified, and we all recognize them. Regardless, if you're a Western human being, or even just a non-Western human being who knows even just a rudimentary education on geography and how things function, it's not shocking for you for someone to be placed in power on some of these territories. But the first rung of the ladder that N.T. Wright, that Jesus himself is trying to get us to understand when he comes and he tells these stories, and is to let people know that there is a realm that has been occupied by an enemy for such a long time. And guess what? I need to let you know that realm can now be occupied by a greater king, by someone who can do better with that territory. And he is that person, Jesus. And I think that's the one thing that I don't think is apparent to every single individual who hears the words of Jesus, hears his stories, or reads his Bible, or even interacts with Christians. We are far too physical, pragmatic thinkers that we even understand that there is a dimension that is so real and so present that God wants to come and occupy. And I use the word occupy lightly because I know that has a very militaristic kind of innuendo on it. But when I mean occupy, I mean what N.T. Wright is talking about in many different instances. I can't pick an exact moment where he talks about the essential transformation of one's heart. There is a point at which in my life I recognize my kingdom needs to be ruled by a good king who will look after me and grant me the peace and love that I didn't even know that I needed. One that is refreshing, powerful, and one that is truly transformational. I think N.T. Wright is leading us up into the next chapters. Our next chapters in chapter 10, Battle and Temple, which is probably going to be very dramatic from the title, I can imagine. And then chapter 11, Space, Time, and Matter. N.T. Wright's going to go all sciencey on us. That should be fun. So this has brought us to the end of this episode of Pages to Progress, but we are going to continue on our next episode in those other 2 chapters. We want to thank you for joining us on the journey. We appreciate that you come and do that with us. In the description link, you can click on the link and you can get the book to come and join us. Steve, if you could hold that book up again. We are reading through Simply Jesus by N.T. Wright. I'm sure it's provoked some thoughts in your heart. It's provoked some thoughts in ours too. But this is us wishing you a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're listening. And God bless you until we see you next time. See you later.